Oma, I'm the director of the Austrian Culture Forum here, and it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you and all the participants to tonight's event, which will be the first in a series on the dialogue between Warsaw and Vienna on smart cities. This year is also the 60th anniversary of the Austrian Cultural Forum, so 60 years anniversary this year, and we will have many, many events, and I hope not only to see you again on the Smart City events, but also throughout the year at other events that we are hosting and co-organizing. But without further ado, I will hand over to the colleagues to introduce tonight's event. Thank you again for coming and enjoy the evening.
Distinguished guests, esteemed panelists, and all of the participants. As one of the vice coordinators of Smart City PW Students Association, it is an honor for me to welcome you all to this important event. One of the first events in our series where we are going to not only discuss the future of urban living, but also to celebrate the collaboration between two dynamic cities, Warsaw and Vienna, both of which are charting unique and inspiring courses toward becoming smarter, more sustainable, and inclusive urban centers. For many, the term smart city often evokes a vision of gleaming skyscrapers, interconnected systems, and cutting-edge technology that simplifies life for everyone, at least in theory. Indeed, this is one of the possible interpretations, but there is another one, equally compelling lens through which we can view smartness. A truly smart city is the one which is accessible for everyone, to all its inhabitants, regardless of age, their ability or socio-economic status. It is a city where human-centered design, community engagement, and inclusivity take center stage for democratic planning. In this interpretation, smart doesn't merely mean technologically advanced, but also socially aware and equitable. During this movement, in this spirit, we would like to introduce you. First things first.
And I have the pleasure to welcome our esteemed guests as well, who will share their expertise during today's event. So first of all, let me introduce the already mentioned Lena Rücker, who is an urban planning officer at the City of Vienna's Municipal Department for Urban Planning and Urban Development. Our next expert is Piotr Franke, Master of Science in Civil Engineering, leader of the podcast Na Dobrym Torze. Literally, it means on the right track. And this is a podcast about balanced transit, city economy, and smart development solutions. I would also like to welcome Alicja Zdrodowska, a specialist for program and planning affairs at the Warsaw Green Spaces Authority, the unit subordinate to municipality governor. The next distinguished speaker is Aleksander Nicał, Doctor of Civil Engineering, academic at the Warsaw University of Technology, whose science interests include production engineering and project management. And the moderator of the debate will be Jakub Romański, a student at the Faculty of Mechatronics, vice chairman of the Student Association Smart City PW, interested in alternative mobility in the city.
As it was already mentioned, the event is done by cooperation of Smart City PW Students Association at the Warsaw University of Technology and Austrian Culture Forum, co-working together with the Austrian Embassy in Poland. As we have designed, we would like to introduce you to urban smart city related solutions implemented in the city of Vienna. So we would like to invite Lena for giving a short keynote speech which would introduce you to many of the interesting solutions we could cover so far.
All right, thank you everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm very glad to be here. I think it could be a very suitable presentation to start off this series of events because I also will give you some insight in some well, some basic facts and figures about the city of Vienna, but also how the system of urban planning works in Vienna. My name is Lena Rücker. I work for a municipal department that is responsible for strategic urban planning and development. And I am an urban planner myself, and I'm going to roughly go through 4 chapters, trying to really stick to the time frame. Start off with some basics, then outline the strategic framework, not only for urban planning, I have to say, but for the whole development of the city in all municipal tasks and areas. I'll dive into the system of urban planning in Vienna and roughly outline our main instruments. And I also give you some smart climate city project examples that in the area of mainly mobility and public space that also highlight our main challenges that we're facing in these areas at the moment. Right, Vienna. I guess some of you have been to Vienna before. Vienna, I guess, is known for many things. One thing that we're proud of and really trying to further work on in the future is a high share of green in the city. With that being said, I have to mention that the green areas in Vienna are not evenly distributed across the city, and they're very concentrated in a green belt that surrounds the city, and that we, well, as an urban planning, haven't really done anything for. So we're very grateful for that, but it's not something that we can rest upon. So we need to further build on that. We have very strict tree protection law. We have urban agri and viniculture. If you've been to Vienna, you might have noticed the vineyards that surround the city. And we have a very strict green and open spaces concept, and also an open spaces and green spaces factor that really determines minimum standards for any kind of new development regarding the area of green spaces that need to be constructed. Vienna is the Austrian capital of cucumber, eggplant, and tomato production. So within the Vienna city area, we are producing most of these vegetables in all of Austria. A little fun fact. Vienna is also a historically compact city, which gives us huge advantages when it comes to environmentally friendly mobility, but also a city that has very livable and structures that are suitable for everyday life. We have many local and polycentric centers strewn across the city, and we have a very efficient land use because of our high density. And we were very lucky that most of the city was not destroyed during the last wars. When it comes to public infrastructure, what is a very important characteristic of Vienna is that public infrastructure is in public ownership. And we're very proud of the high quality that we can deliver, especially in the area of energy supply, waste management, water supply, but also public housing, public transportation, healthcare. So all these fields are operated by the public sector. Vienna is very well known for affordable housing. And what I just want to mention quickly is that currently Vienna is serving 50% of its citizens with social housing. We have a housing stock of roughly 200,000 units that we own ourselves, and another 200,000 the city is subsidized. And we have a citywide network of social housing units. Here you can see the communal buildings that belong to the city in total. And because of some very intelligent decisions in the past, we have them evenly distributed across the city, which also allows for a social mix of its inhabitants. We also have very strong developer competitions and quality criteria for every new development. And we have active land policy. I will go into detail a little later. The model split in Vienna, these are the 2023 numbers, we'll have the new numbers for 2024 soon, is roughly, we have a share of motorized individual traffic of around 26-25%. The rest is what we would say sustainable modes of transportation, with a very high share of public transportation, over 30%, and a very strongly increasing share of biking as well. But we also have, what you can see on the right here, a very ambitious goal for, well, in 10 years' time, which is to reduce the share of motorized vehicle traffic to 15%, which is a little less than half, 50% cut. So we have to really work towards that goal if we want to reach it. Very quickly, public transportation is the backbone of mobility system in Vienna and has been so for many years. It is our main strategy in the mobility area. And we have a very high quality of service and accessibility in all of the city. Like any other city, we face huge challenges. I don't need to tell you about that. But something that we're very concerned with is, of course, climate change and the need to adapt and also to protect the climate. And the population growth, because Vienna has just last year hit 2 million people mark again, which it already had before the First World War, but now we're back at 2 million again. And we are growing quite rapidly, so it's an average of 20,000 people coming to Vienna every year. And 20,000 people is, well, none of our urban development areas could fit the amount of people that move to Vienna in 1 year. So we need to find some good solutions for that population growth as well. The strategic framework. As I mentioned before, this is the strategic framework that both reflects to the whole city, the development of the whole city in every area of public task, but also to urban planning. So I split it in two strategies, because the main strategy, that is our key framework strategy for the whole city, every public task, is the Smart Climate City strategy that had already several revisions and monitoring processes. Our current strategy is from 2022. It has been a learning system constantly evolving. And what I find really important, because you might be wondering that I'm not really going to talk about technological solutions here, but that is just not our understanding of a smart city. A smart city comes from the mission statement or the overall goal to create a high quality of life for everyone in the city through a mix of social and technological solutions where there's necessary, and while at the same time maximizing resource preservation. And we, in Vienna, we believe that the only way to really upkeep the high quality of life and to increase it for certain vulnerable groups as well is through resource conservation, is through a more sustainable path towards the future. That is our mission statement. Now, I'm not going to go into detail, and the Smart Climate City strategy is available online in English as well if you want to have some kind of inspiration how a mix of quantitative and qualitative goals can really set out the guidelines for the whole development of the city. But just want to quickly say that it is an umbrella strategy, and what I mean by that is that it's not a strategy for urban planning on its own, but it is a strategy that is, and also was per resolution of the City Council, drafted for the whole city, for every municipal department, every municipal corporation business. So that doesn't mean that their goals are legally binding, but they set out a path that we move on to together. And it just means that we have a certain kind of backbone for our development that is really important. So that for us is the worth of the strategy, and it's very, I would say that it's very well recognized in Vienna, and even without our, let's say, remembering other departments in the city, because we are responsible for this strategy. The other departments have themselves, taken up the responsibility to really work towards implementation of these goals. We have three, I would say, main dimensions. I won't go into detail because I think you all know the difference between climate protection, climate adaptation, and also the circular economy, or what we say is resource conservation. These, I would say, are the main three dimensions in which we formulate our goals and set out our measures. And these will, in the future, of course, for climate protection, we have a lot of solutions already. For climate adaptations, we also know what we need to do. For the circular economy, I would say that we're just beginning to get an understanding of the direction that we need to move towards, because a lot of influencing factors in the circular economy, like individual consumption, are but not within the direct reach of the public sector. So we need to really figure out the best solutions to how we can, as a city, provide the basis to enable a circular economy in the way we live, in the way we consume and move in a city. So it will remain a strategy where we're always going to be working and learning in the process. Now, the Smart City strategy is part of a whole set of strategies, and not all of them are on this on the screen here. But what I want to point out is what I mentioned, that the Smart City strategy is the framework strategy. It stands above all other strategies. And then there's sectoral strategies and program, also concepts that contain specific measures and timelines. And the main sectoral strategy for us in urban planning is the urban development plan. And that is a strategic, a spatial development plan. So it contains very specific spatial specifications and regulations, but for the development of the whole city. And it is also a sense of self-commitment. It sets out rules for the private sector as well as the public sector. And it is currently, well, it's a bit outdated now because we're just in the process of finishing the new STEP, the Urban Development Plan, which will be published in summer, I hope. And the Urban Development Plan, so that you can get a better imagination, really is a spatial strategy. So we have, for example, a concept for urban development where we set out urban development areas. Because this is already 10 years old, some of these areas have already been developed further. But what's really important to me is that it's not only areas like completely new urban development areas somewhere in the outskirts of the city, it's also urban development areas in the center. We also have a similar concept for developing existing centers and strengthening their central functions all over the city. But we also have a concept for green and open spaces, how we're going to protect the spaces that we already have, and how we're going to further develop the green and open spaces so that they become more climate resilient in the future, so that more people can easily access them, and so that they become more of a network throughout all of the city. So that is our main spatial instrument. Now quickly, does urban planning work in Vienna? It's a bit complex because we have a lot of municipal departments. But I will say that in short, we are responsible for the strategic level. So we look at the whole city, always, with our strategies, with our target images, with our planning principles. So mainly focusing on the area mobility, but also green and open spaces, public spaces, very important, and urban and regional development, also meaning cross-border development and cooperation. So we set out guidelines and rules, and we are also the Smart Climate City office in the city of Vienna. But there is also, and that's very important, another municipal department that is responsible for the more local level. So for the district planning and the zoning. So they don't look at the whole city anymore. They're responsible for implementing the processes that lead to new urban development areas. And then there's also several other departments, like the ones that are responsible for architecture and urban design, or also road management and road construction. So they work on the real project implementation level, not only in urban development, but they are the ones that draw the technical plans or supervise the contractors that we work with in implementation. Main planning instruments, I already mentioned some. We have the Smart Climate City strategy that stands above all sectoral strategy. Then we have the urban development plan that looks at the whole city. We have district development concepts for certain projects of a certain size. And we almost always, for every new development, have urban design guidelines. And these then are the basis for what we set out in the zoning and development plan. So what we actually, there's no proper English term for this, verrechtlichen, what we actually put into a legal framework for how a certain plot of land can be developed. And then, based on the zoning and development plan and all these other development and design guidelines, we have developers and architectural competitions. In some cases, we have a property advisory board that decides if quality criteria are met. We have different sets of quality criteria for different projects, and we also, in some cases, have urban development contracts where we set out specific guidelines, sometimes also financial contributions. Right, very complex, always depends on the project, the size, the location, of course, but in general, I would say for every project, there are certain quality criteria and standards to be met. We also have planning principles, and today, what I will show you next are some projects that really highlight our principles, but also our main challenges in the area of mobility and the transformation of public space. I would say that our principles in general are to really focus urban development on climate protection, on soil protection, to use public space. And when I say public space, I mean, of course, squares, and I mean sidewalks, but I mainly mean street space that is now reserved for cars. We need to use that space for climate change adaptation. We also need demand, or to even increase our demand-oriented offers for environmentally friendly mobility, and of course to further develop a city of short distances building on the great structure that we already have in most parts of the city. Livable urban structures. So there's a lot of elements for livable urban structures and contributing to livable urban structures, and I will say that it's not possible to touch upon all of them, but I'll just quickly dive into this area of smart city projects that for me often come together in the realm of public space, because it is where mobility, where a city of short distances, a lively mix of functions and of uses in a city come together. I'll start with our goals for mobility and transport. We're not going to linger here for too long. Just want to say that we have very ambitious goals, as I mentioned before. And for us, the concept of the 50-minute city, or a city of short distances, that's the term that I would prefer, is one that is realized also mainly through the redesign of streets that in turn create a more attractive environment for any kind of local businesses or active uses that again create for this dense mix of different kinds of infrastructures that we want in a city. Now, we have a lot of projects going on, of course, and we'll continually work on expanding our public transportation network. We have a new subway network that is being expanded at the moment. We will have our first fully automated metro line within the next 3 years. We're building several new tram lines. We have a cycling network expansion program. We have a master plan that looks at the walking infrastructure and the walkability for each district and identifies the deficits. And all these things, we're going to continue to work on them, but what is really challenging, okay, this is one of the cycling infrastructure projects following a Dutch example that was just recently implemented. But what is the real challenge is how are we going to deal with public space and how we're going to create a transformation of public space, and that also means a redistribution of public space in a larger scale. Because we have to imagine, this is the only space that we have left in the city. So we're not going to be able to build more large-scale parks to tear down houses. It's not a realistic outlook. It's probably also not a desirable one. So we need to figure out a solution on how are we going to work with what we already have, and how are we going to redistribute and redesign and enhance the different kinds of usabilities of that space so that it contributes to climate adaptation, but also creates space for people that have no private free spaces, that maybe live in very small apartments, maybe have very limited funds to actually leave the city on the weekends and during summertime when it gets really hot. So there's so many different demands on public space. The pressure is really high. And we are, or have been exploring several different strategies to transform public space. And I will say that, I won't go into detail, but we have, of course, done several redesign projects, and I would rather maybe point out some specific projects for climate-sensitive redesign of public space. And one that is most well known, or was most controversial in Vienna, is the redesign of one of our largest shopping streets, Marie-Hilfer-Straße. It had a lot of media attention, and that was mainly because the local business owners were very adamantly against that project, because they feared that once we got rid of the cars and the parking spots, then of course no customers would come and the revenues would go down. Now, this project was the first one of this scale, and we had a very comprehensive participation process looking at all the local stakeholders. We also did an analysis of the spatial situation. It's called a social space analysis that we conduct beforehand projects to look at the different interests of the groups that use the space. So through this process, we could also identify the vulnerable groups that are very, that use this street, that have been using the street for many years, but also different kinds of interest groups like neighbors, people living in the area, and of course local business owners, and really figure out how can we find the best synergies to cover all these interests. And the project has been a full success. It's a pedestrian area in the center and like a shared space on the outer edges. And what we've learned from it is that the local business owners, they need not be afraid of a loss of revenues. And what I find very interesting is that now the local business association in Vienna is one of the biggest supporters of realizing more pedestrian areas, because they realized what it brings, and they have even contributed to public-private partnership projects where they have paid the large share of redesign of several streets within the city center and getting rid of all parking spots. That was it was very impactful, and we're still building on that and on the learnings that we drew from this very comprehensive participation process. Another great example is Praterstern. It is a huge infrastructure node. So it's where the S-Bahn comes together, so the regional trains, but also the metro, several buses, tram lines. So it is a very high frequented point, and it also has always been a very problematic area, especially in the political communication, because it's always been a place where there is a lot of homeless people, people with addiction problems hanging around, people that just don't have any other place to go to, because there's a supermarket open 24/7, or for Austrian standards 24/7, maybe it's rather till 10 o'clock in the evening, but but that's very long in Vienna. So very popular spot. This is already the picture from the redesign. They don't have any other Google Maps from the situation before. But it was a big redesign process. And what I really found very interesting is that we did a social space analysis there as well, and also really talked to especially the homeless people and the vulnerable groups that use the space and asked them what kind of space do they need. Because we know that they need spaces to retreat to, so where they can feel less in the public eye, not because they like to do illegal things, but because they want to sleep. They need to rest. They need to rest somewhere in the shade. They need to have access to water, to a toilet, and so on. So these things were all integrated in the design. We've created a multitude of different areas where people find different, say, usabilities and also atmospheres. So a lot of different people are drawn to the area now. We have some kind of water fountain play thing in the middle that really is very attractive to the young and the old. And it has been a huge success. I'm sure there will be many more redesigns of Praterstern. It will always be somewhat problematic. There will always be some, let's say, unfavorable interactions between different groups. But it has really grown so much in the way we can use it now, different groups can use it, and also the acceptance has grown. People feel much more safe there if they have to pass through Praterstern, because now there's not only homeless people sleeping in the grass, but there's also children playing next to them. And that's just been, I think it's a great example for a symbiosis that's necessary in the city in a lot of spots. And these spots, well, we have learned in Vienna, we can never fully get rid of them. People are just going to move around, and then there's going to be hotspots in different areas of the city, but we can enhance the coexistence through spatial planning measures and through urban design measures. Another example, and that is something that we've been focusing on in recent years because it's usually smaller scale projects, and I would say there's very little protest against it, is to really focus on the areas surrounding schools and social infrastructure. And this one is a school in a very densely populated district in Vienna, 8th district. These are the before pictures. So that was the school forecourt, and that was the street before the school. So it was a parking lot. And it was a very successful redesign project that really created a forecourt where, interestingly, people and parents of very many different social backgrounds now meet and mingle. And we've also created a sort of it's a cycling street that doesn't allow cars to pass through anymore in this very part of the street, and it's an incredible change of atmosphere, of course. And we have now increasingly districts that really are supporting these projects, and that also are not afraid anymore to have a debate with the parents about where they can drop off their kids, because they see if the last meters that the kids need to walk to the school, if they need to walk longer, but it's still in a safer environment because there's no cars and there's no traffic security issues, and also the space is enjoyable and you can meet other people, then it isn't much of a problem anymore. Right. Something that we often encounter, and that is a big challenge, I already mentioned that there's often voices against projects for different reasons. And there's always the loud voices that scream and they cry about parking spots that they're going to lose. And interestingly, these voices, even though they may be fewer, they're always the loudest. I think it's the same in every city, in every project. But we have, I think, there's a lot of projects been realized in recent years in Vienna, and the city's administration, the political level has become a little more confident in how to advocate such projects. So that is a great thing, I think. We don't discuss every single parking spot anymore, but now we have different issues because people want more trees, and they keep asking us, why don't you plant even more trees? So what we try to use as a method of communication now is this kind of street X-ray to show people that it's not easy to plant a tree in a densely built city where there's a lot going on that you can't see. So that is something that we try to incorporate in redesign projects now to make people understand that there are only so few locations where you can actually plant the tree, and then every single tree is very, very expensive. And interestingly, the street X-ray has become very popular, and a lot of districts have now really performed different kinds of street X-ray projects themselves, because in Austria, in Vienna, the districts are financially responsible for redesign of public space, which is a huge financial burden. And this makes it a little easier for people to explain what's possible and what's not. Right, I have 2 more projects. I'll be really quick, but I want to also touch upon urban development and how we can create livable structures in urban development. Now, this is one of the newer urban development areas in Vienna. It's already been finalized. This is a before picture. It used to be a train infrastructure area attached to the main train station of Vienna, and it's called Sonnenwendviertel. And we had it was the master planning process spun across many, many years, as you can imagine. It's a very large area. And what I just want to point out is that we had an old master plan. And I don't know, maybe some of you can tell, but what we can see here is very large structures, not a lot of permeability, and I would say a bit of an, you can see very old planning paradigms here, okay? So these are not what we would understand as adequate structures in urban planning today anymore. And interestingly, in the process, when the first houses were realized, I think they turned out all right, but they were huge structures. And in the process, because there's of course always some innovation and some people ask the right questions, the decision was made on a political level to revise the master plan and to create something more organic for the second half of the urban development area. That is the new master plan from 2013. Of course, from today's perspective, it's also debatable because it's 10 years old already. But what you can see here on the eastern side is that the structure looks completely different. I have a comparison here. So we have smaller plots, building plots. We have an organic structure with permeable structures that actually allow you to pass through, that create different kinds of public spaces in between them. And we got rid of the ability to build individual parking garages, subterranean. So right now, in this project, we only have one large collective garage. And that also has the intended side effect that it takes you 5 minutes to get to the tram, but also to your car. So the car, of course, becomes less attractive in turn. And I think that's a very nice example. It has a very unique atmosphere, and we also managed from the old master plan, and it wasn't me, of course, because I was, I think, in school, But we managed, as a city, the urban planning initiative managed to get rid of the idea of having a central street with two-directional motorized traffic, but to rather create a pedestrian area completely free of any car traffic. Because you cannot drive into that whole area, or just some parts where you need to, be able to access supermarkets, but you cannot drive through this area with your car anymore. And that means that children are playing outside, they're moving around freely. You see parents and grown-ups with cargo bikes everywhere. And it has become a very, what we think is an urban atmosphere, and what could also be an urban atmosphere in some old parts of the city. There's a livable density of different kinds of uses, of different kinds of users in public space. The only thing that I would criticize from today's perspective, of course, is that in terms of climate adaptation, 10 years ago, we weren't at the same point we're today. So there's definitely a lack of unsealed area and of trees and of greenery, shades, but we are working on that now. And yeah, if you ever come to Vienna and want to visit an urban development area, I would recommend you go there. Right, so the last project, because in my department, I work in a sub-department that is responsible for cross-sectional urban issues. Sounds a bit pretentious, but what it really means is we focus on public space because that's where so many different issues in urban planning come together. And we have, following the Barcelona Superblocks model, developed our own Supergrätzel model for how we can redesign and really transform whole areas of the city, so that, in contrast to just redesigning one simple street, so that within a whole area you can feel a difference. You can feel a difference in the quality of stay, in traffic security, in the whole atmosphere and the usability, the options to really move around and use public space. So a Supergrätzel is a defined area within a city, has a certain size, maximum size, and it has a traffic calmed core, as you can see here, where motorized traffic cannot pass through anymore at high speed. So you can only make little turns and then have to move back out because the center is a pedestrian area. And in between, or in the outskirts of the pedestrian area, we have modal filters. So you cannot pass through anymore with a car, but you can pass through with a bike, cargo bike, or whatever kind of sustainable mode of transportation. We have created more open and green spaces, or that is the intention in Supergrätzel, and we are currently in the final phase of realizing the first of such project in Vienna. Will be realized in summer of this year, and we are preparing the rollout across the whole city because we want at least one Supergrätzel in every district, and we have a lot of political favor for the project as well. And just to give you some impressions, we started in the pilot phase with very cheap and very quickly implementable measures. So we drew some things on the ground. We put up these little baskets so that cars realize they can't pass through anymore, put up some benches, had different kinds of participation events, communication events, and showed people that reorganization of traffic is not the end of the world and that it works still. So reorganization of traffic was already done in the pilot phase. And now we are in the final implementation, so it's not fully constructed yet, but we are almost finished, and this is a rendering of what it's going to look like. That is the pedestrian area surrounding a school in the center. And we will have different kinds of microclimate, microgreen spaces surrounding that area as well. And so far, it's been interesting because we have done a lot of surveys with the residents, before and after, of course. And there is a definitely increased feeling of safety in the street, not only because there's no through traffic at high speed anymore, but also because there's a lively atmosphere. There's people on the streets, there's children on the streets. We have already done a microclimate simulation, and of course the trees are not the size yet where we have parameters that we can calculate with, but we're going to reach the micro climate benefits within the next 4 to 5 years. And we've also seen that within the first week, cars were very confused. They didn't know where to drive. Some actually tried to run down these little, these little things that come out of the ground. And in the first week also we noticed some increase of traffic in the surrounding area. But now, interestingly, we have a 30% reduction of motorized traffic in the whole area, which also means a radius of 1.5 kilometers around the Supergrätzl. We have reduced 60% of parking spaces, or will be reduced in the final project. And yeah, still seems to work. People, of course, have found other things to complain about, because no, I'm not trying to make fun of them. It is an issue, of course, but in a city, of course, when you enhance the quality of public space, then it invites people to stay there for longer, in the evening, for example. And that can be a problem for some people. So we are constantly in contact with the people and mediating, and we've also done some changes. We've moved some benches, moved some waste paper basket, and it's an ongoing process that we learn from a lot. But it's been a great success so far, and we can proudly say that out of the 23 Viennese districts, we have about, right now, 13 districts that already have budgeted the planning of the Supergrätzl within their districts. So I hope that the situation doesn't change too much after the next elections, which we have in October. But we are very optimistic for the moment. Yeah, thank you. That was a little insight into Vienna. I didn't translate that. I'm going to skip it. Thank you.
Thank you. As I think it's on. Can you hear? Oh yeah. Because as I think majority of us would agree that Vienna is great. It's like one of the top few cities in Europe, etc. And a lot of our local Polish politicians use Vienna as an example. Like, let's do this because in Vienna it happened and it worked right. But you can also hear a counter-argument that, yeah, in Vienna it worked because Vienna's population peaked 100 years ago and now it's declining, and because of that they don't have enough cars. And like, realistically, do you think it played a factor? It was like, it had huge impact? Like, what's the real situation there? Thank you.
So it's true that there were a few decades of population decline in Vienna. But it's been growing for the last 20 years, and the growth that we see now is, we've not seen that for many years, and we have different kind of prognosis that also see a further increase, of course, in connection to global conflicts, unfortunately, and climate change. But I will say that at first it's difficult to complain Vienna to Warsaw in general, because there is a completely different, there's different history, and I know that, I guess that Warsaw, as you can see some places in the city, is very strongly still, at least in architecture, implemented by its history, affected by its history in positive and negative ways when it comes to the urban structure that has been created, and so is Vienna. And in Vienna we have advantages that in Warsaw I think you don't have on that scale, because we have densely built city and really high quality buildings that also allow for fairly easy transformation or change of energy system in terms of in comparison to other types of buildings. So we have a very good situation, good status quo. And what I think is also often mentioned when we talk about what works well in Vienna, because of course a lot of things don't work so well, is the whole area of social housing and affordable housing. And there again, I have to say, Vienna was lucky that they made the right decisions in the beginning of the 20th century and bought so many plots of land that now they would never be able to afford. So we built on that, and it's great, and we have also taken back the whole area of building communal housing again ourselves. But there's been many years, especially when population decline was happening, where there just weren't enough funds to construct social housing. So there was a 25-year break on constructing social housing again. So we've definitely profited from the growth now, because some things are just not, I would say it's never good for urban planning when population declines. So you can never, it never helps you to implement successful projects because when you on the one hand need the funds, but also for creating livable structures, you need a kind of population density. You need, of course, people that consume within a city and that keep up the infrastructure that you have within a city. So I wouldn't say that that has helped Vienna a lot. I would say that from an urban planning perspective, those are very difficult years. And that now, of course, with the also political, let's say, acceptance that climate change is real and that it affects us, there has been some positive movement in recent years on the local level, on the national level, at least for the last 5 years now. Well, we'll see. And yeah, what I want to say in short is comparing Vienna to Warsaw is very difficult in this whole area of urban planning. And this whole social democratic history in Vienna, where the focus was always, even though there's many things that we could debate about, there was always a very strong focus on creating a livable city for all people that live in the city. So it was always a very strong focus on creating demand-oriented structures, infrastructure, housing, public transportation in any way. And I feel like that this social democratic understanding of a city and also out of this social democratic tradition, this very strong guidelines and regulations for what the private sector is allowed to do, that has really helped us to build and to come to where we are now. And yeah, even though not everything is great, I think it's really great to be a planner in a city where the public sector takes a very strong stand and to really not only with its own actions, but also shaping the actions of private investors towards a common goal and to holding them accountable as well.
Which one was the first? Oh, okay.
Thank you. Hello. I have a question about the suburbs, because we have an issue right now in Warsaw, right? That exactly, maybe this is not exodus, right? But many people are moving. I also moved to the suburbia of Warsaw, and first question is about the plan. Is your urban plan also covering the suburbs? And,
Yes.
And
I
exactly
will
how
say yes and no before,
Yeah.
Because Vienna is a metropolitan region and we have a lot of smaller municipalities surrounding Vienna that are kind of directly intertwined with the city. So Vienna doesn't end at its borders. And of course, while we try to form a lot of cross-border cooperations, that is always where it becomes most difficult. And a lot of people that work or consume or live their daily lives in Vienna, in the city, they live in the suburbs outside of the city, and that's where it gets really tricky.
Same here, exactly same here when this is the issue, right? Because many people are going actually out of Warsaw, and then they actually, I also understand it, right? They request all the actually city services to be also extended, like communication, public transport, etc., also to the suburbs. So this is like a cost, of course, for Warsaw as a city. And the second question I had, do you have any I don't know, execution of it? Is it like some tricks and tips how to actually force the cooperation? Because sometimes it's difficult exactly to. I really appreciate what you are saying, but Ordnung muss sein, aber nicht in Warsaw. This is what we are lacking, right, in Warsaw. We don't have kind of following of the executions. I have seen many policies city policies that have been actually agreed on the city level, but they haven't been followed up by the districts of the Warsaw. So this is like complete. Yeah. Sometimes there's a house, so sometimes it's followed up by many districts, but this is really difficult sometimes to live in it. I believe we are still, of course, impacted, as you say, by many factors from history and actually right now modern factors. Mm-hmm. But I believe this is one of the issues, right? The suburbs are really forcing, and they are really, for instance, they are forcing also the highways to be actually to go through Warsaw, and there are really still the plans to actually implement build the highways through Warsaw. Mm-hmm. And exactly the plans are from the real past, like Soviet times, 70s or something. So this is really a problem. So I don't believe you have such issues, but maybe something similar.
So we don't have the issues on the same scale, but I would say that from all areas of urban planning, the whole area of cross-border cooperation, cross-border financing of public infrastructure, especially mobility infrastructure, public transportation, as well as cycling infrastructure, is our weakest link because, well, we are mainly social democratically governed city. The surrounding municipalities, well, it depends on the municipality, but they're usually, or a lot of them are governed by the Conservative Party, so they don't get along too well, as you can imagine. We have several cooperative frameworks and partnerships through which, with a lot of mediation, we can realize a lot of projects. And I will say that there's also this understanding of the surrounding municipalities that they want us to build everything for them. Yeah. And I think in a lot of area, Vienna does that as well because it sees the benefit and because Vienna feels like we want to control and to reduce the share of motorized individual traffic on our borders. We're not so far yet as to, forbid any vehicles to enter. But our cross-border solution for the moment is to create the right incentives. So we build public transportation. We mainly finance the regional train lines that surround Vienna. It's not only Vienna that finances them, but we bear the large part. And we also build park and ride stations, sometimes with federal funding as well, on the outside of the city borders, because we feel for us the benefit is larger. And I won't say that there's a lot of really great projects in this area, but with some municipalities we have, let's say, better communication. With some it's more difficult, and it's always a huge issue. And there is, I would say that it's very difficult because in Austria, I don't know what it's like in Poland, but we don't have a national planning and spatial planning regulation. So it's only done on the state level. So essentially, all 9 states can do what they want to some extent, but when it comes to their regulations and their, settlement boundaries, for example, and where they build new plots of land. So Vienna wants, of course, the surrounding areas to build close to the existing public transportation lines, but they don't always want to do that. I feel like it's getting better, and they increasingly also see the value of using the existing infrastructure and also partly contributing to the expansion of the infrastructure, but it's still a very, very difficult issue. And the second, just one. What was the second question again? You were talking about, I think you were talking about the power also that I think the what's the word in English? Yes, execution power. Thank you, execution. So, just to put it shortly, I think in Vienna we definitely have to improve how we execute the regulations we set out. But I will say that private stakeholders in Vienna know that they cannot, significantly overstep the boundaries, because in large projects and projects with a lot of public eye on them, the execution will be done. I just think that we lack execution in smaller scale projects. For example, when it comes to, we want developers to realize facade greening, and in many cases they don't realize it, or they realize it in a very, very sad attempt with, 10 square meters of facade greening when they would need to cover 100 square meters. So we definitely lack some execution, but in a large scale I think it works fairly well, because we have these very strict instruments and also different kinds of juries, different kinds of process in the planning process. And they usually work well. And since Vienna does not, does through the building code and also the zoning code, directly influence who can actually obtain a plot of land, we have a lot of power in that.
Hello? Oh, okay. We understand that every one of us might have many interesting questions. That's literally why we have gathered there. However, as the designers of the event, we have planned to redistribute a portion of time for session of questions and answers for each of the interested experts after the debate. So that's why during the current moment we would like to invite you for listening to the debate. I would like to invite Kuba, the moderator of the debate, Lena, and other guests we have invited.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to invite my guests to the debate, Mr. Piotr Franke from Warsaw University of Technology, aforementioned Lena Rücker from Vienna, and Alexander Nicał and Ms. Alicja from Warsaw Green Department. Please take your seats and we will start shortly. One microphone per two guests. Okay, so musicie Państwo się podnieść. So thank you very much for coming to our debate, first and foremost. And well, starting from what Lena left off at Vienna city planning, what do you think is the biggest obstacle nowadays in city development, both in short form, like what are we facing immediately, and what are we facing long term, like for example, climate change? I would ask the same question to each one of you, and if everyone has a bit of time to answer. This is the format of our debate. If anyone has questions, you can ask each other during the debate. First, Mr. Alexander, if you can start.
Okay, thank you very much for invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I was participating in Österreichisches Institut for many years as a student at the time, but focusing on a question, the long and short-term challenges of city in Warsaw. So if you take it short-term challenges, I think there are always differences in the approach between the city of Warsaw and the government in Poland, because the regulations very often change, and it's hard to plan something for long term because you don't know what's actually going to be in the next 4 years. And if I have to answer the long-term issues, so I think that are quite similar to what was mentioned by Lena Rücker. We have also aging society in Poland and in Warsaw, so there's still more and more older people, so they need to have the access to hospitals. They need to live in the districts where actually well communicated, and we can say that we have invest lots of money. I mean the private sector in building a lot of settlements here in Warsaw, but I think that there must be a good cooperation between the local government here in Warsaw, the local authorities, and the private sector. I mean, it should actually, this cooperation should combine that once we are building the settlements for 100,000 of people actually, and secondly, we need to build also the railways, the communication, so the transportation, the trams, the buses, so that the people can communicate. I lived for many years in the north part of Warsaw, Białęka. It was like a new district. There were lots of settlements built in the first decade of 21st century, but still the people living there are facing problem with the communication. So there's lack of trams and buses for many years. So I think the cooperation is a key issue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Miss Alicja, please.
First, I want to thank Lena. It was very nice to hear you and what you said about Vienna, because the structure of this Warsaw and Vienna is different, but we challenge similar problems. And one of those you mentioned is climate changes and those effects. And of course, Warsaw also faces those problems. And I wanted to tell you now about one of the projects, Zarząd Zieleni, which I represent, aimed to mitigate the effects of climate changes. And it's a very interesting project called Szuwar Warszawski. I don't know how to translate it, like Warsaw bushes or something like that. But the project is about recreated natural aquatic habitats. So we are trying to make them more natural and restoration of their habitats, support biodiversity and water retention, and also have a very positive impact on a microclimate. We put it in a lot of locations this year, like in public parks, but also in public other squares. In Las Kabacki Forest, sorry, and I think we will continue in the next year. And the things the people are saying about this project and how it's seen in society, in Warsaw society, it was also very positive, because these places are, besides this fact, they work better and the water retention is higher. They look more pleasant, and in the spending time for the people is more pleasant. So we think it was one of the success.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for invitation, and the first thank you also for the presentation. Very interesting, and I'm really impressed, and I was really impressed during your presentation that understanding of smart city is in such a way connected with urban planning, because when we think about obstacles in development, urban development, from my point of view, urban planning is a really crucial thing, and actually I would say the missing urban planning in Warsaw, the whole area, not the city itself, I would say it's a very big problem, and the rapid development of suburban areas that is uncontrolled. The other thing that is very important from my point of view, and the urban development in the central area, is the ownership of development areas. That is, there are many conflicts. Many areas are blocked, and the new buildings aren't built because of different conflicts with historical background in areas very well connected. When we think about areas of Warsaw East Station or West Station, two or three the biggest stations in Warsaw. Like the example you presented in Vienna, the main station, we have the space that is very well connected with many trains, but it's like free.
It's not really well developed. It's in the middle of basically a giant open space in case of Warsaw East, with not many new developments being built because of the historical ownership structure of the land around it, and with really not much of a willingness of owners of this land to develop it, because they are holding onto it for the raising cost of the land instead of actually building there something. And Lena, what's in your opinion the biggest short and long-term problem?
That's a great keyword, I think. So there's many big obstacles, and I think we touched upon many of them already. What I think is one of the biggest, also in context to climate change and how we use resources, is how we use the existing resources. By that I mean also the existing infrastructure, the existing space, the existing buildings, of course, because we will in the future, or what we like to say is that most of the city, most of the housing units, buildings that we are ever going to inhabit are already built, mainly, yeah? So we need to further push re-densification of the existing structures, and of course activate the structures that are not being used currently. It's a bit different situation in Vienna. Of course, we also have a lot of like housing complete buildings, single apartment units that are also being, unused for speculation purposes. But when it comes to plots of land that are located in certain zones, then the city has the ability to set out a limit date. Until then, you have to,
Start doing
draft.
something.
You have to start the process. So you have to draft your tendering plans for building on that plot of land, and it's not been executed in Vienna so far because it's never a single developer has never reached that deadline. We actually have one case now for one plot of land in the 12th district where we are discussing whether we can take it away from the owner, which is very difficult in Austria. But also in theory, the whole concept already is enough for them to develop in within a certain time frame.
If I could paraphrase it, it's basically like the concept of a death penalty in law that's never actually executed.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that we take away the plot of land from them in general, but we give the permission to build upon it to someone else.
Okay, and this nicely brings us to the next question. Who should lead the role in city developments? Is it the private capital? Is it the municipal government, local government, or the state government of Warsaw, Vienna, or any city we're talking about? Mr. Alexander, please.
Okay, that's a good question, not easy to answer, because there must be, answering the first question, actually, the second is quite the same, my answer, so it should be a good combination of a private sector and a public sector. So of course we need to take into consideration the different goals. So the private sector is always focused on the revenues, yes, but the public sector has different goals and need to take care of the social aspect, need to take care of the people, of the aging society, at the same time also the young generation and the people with families. But yes, but somebody has to make a decision, of course, and I think that should be, of course, the city that finally makes the decision. But after being consulted by the expert, by also the people that are living in the districts, in the particular districts, and the people that actually are, they are actually involved in the whole process. I was once imagining, I was in December, before the Christmas, I was asked by there were two ladies, and here we have a big gallery in Warsaw, and I was asked about the future of Warsaw. There was a plan, Warsaw 2030. And I was talking to a lady before, and she was telling me, that we should pay more attention to these green aspects. And I fully agree with that, but 10 minutes later, there was a family crossing the sidewalk, and they were just telling me, okay, that's a great idea, but in December we have 2 kids, and one of our kids is ill, and we need to go to the healthcare, and there's no place to park our car. It's like minus 5 degrees, and we have to go with our sick kid to a doctor. So also we need to pay attention to those aspects, that there are families with this problems.
Okay, we will go back to this issue, and you nicely touched upon the green situation. So now I think Ms. Alicia can nicely expand this topic.
Yeah, thank you. So you asked who should lead in the city development. I think that definitely local governments, but we shouldn't forget about cooperation with citizens and the very important aspects of public consultations, and Warsaw pay very big attention to this aspect. We trying to consult a lot of projects with a lot of them in big success, I hope. And what I wanted to add that I don't worry about the private sector, because they have a really strong card.
They will find a way, basically.
Yes, we have to pay attention and take care about those who don't have this power.
Thank you very much. No. Mr. Franke?
So I completely agree that the leading role should have the local government, the municipal level. But I would also add that from the central level, we need also support. And one of the problems or issues could be, for example, this suburban areas development, and maybe we should think about a new legal framework for such as metropolis
for the
law.
donut supporting Warsaw, Obważanek Warszawski, the surrounding cities that basically live off Warsaw but don't pay up to the abilities they gain access to by being in Warsaw.
Exactly,
Yeah?
and to support cooperation between the city of Warsaw and surrounding areas.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I agree with all of you. I feel the leading role should definitely be the local authority, with like an equal participation of private stakeholders, businesses, and the population. Of course, with different areas, because I do agree that especially in the housing sector, it won't be possible without private capital. It's not realistic. But I feel that regulations and guidelines are the most powerful tool that a local government has, and quality standards, and that I don't think Vienna even uses them to its full potential, right? There's a lot more possibilities that we need to explore in the future in order to set both boundaries but also the quality standards to the highest possible level. And I think that for the moment, private capital and private developers, private stakeholders, they get off comfortably. So with their contributions, they still make a lot of profit. What I would also like to say is that I also agree with you that the national level plays an important role, and that is something that we're very concerned with in Austria at the moment, of course, because we stand on the verge of a far-right government and a couple of really hard years for the whole area of planning and ecological development. And what we see as well is that because of the way that public funds from the national level are distributed in Austria down to the local level, we have this very complicated scheme of how public revenues are being distributed, that cities, especially cities catering to much larger amount of people than actually live in the city, are really underfunded and have been underfunded for many years. And especially social infrastructure suffers from that. We see that in the school, children, kindergarten, in that whole child care system and education system. So that I think is also a stakeholder that should step in more in the future, but maybe not in Austria.
A small anecdote, I once was discussing with an official from the city center of Warsaw, like the Śródmieście, the most inwards place. He said that during the nighttime, I have the money to fund 100,000 people, but during the day, I would need the money for 500,000 people. And the next question is, can standardization help or should be enforced? Like we have standards for road building, highway building, railway building. Is smart city standardization something that we should aim for? For example, let's use certain IT standards or certain building standards like the Zupa-Grätzl or the super blocks that Rafał mentioned. Is this a way to both limit costs, or is it limiting the freedom of urban development? Mr. Alexander.
Yeah, it's a good question again. Once we need to think what actually standardization is for. Yes, it's actually why we do why we plan, why we standardize things. Yeah, so once, of course, it's a good aspect because if we have wstandards, it's easier to implement solutions, certain solutions. On the other side, we need to pay attention that the standards in the whole European Union may differ. I would just maybe give you some short example in terms of roads. We have different climate in Poland and in Spain, for example. So the standards must be a bit different. And also today was mentioned the history of the city. The Warsaw was actually rebuilt after the Second World War. So the structure, the urban aspects of the city, the structure, the roads, other things, they are totally different than in other cities, yes. For example, in Łódź, there was a city actually for manufacturing purposes, yes. So standardization is good, but we need to also pay attention that it won't actually be the same for all cities in the European Union, or at least also in Poland, might not be the same.
Okay, thank you.
So maybe I will say something about the standards in urban planning, because Warsaw and actually all the cities in Poland, we are in a very interesting point, because since last year we have a new law, a new urban planning act, and it forces us to use very strict standards. We have standards from very specific zones, like density, standardized, and etc. I won't mention all of those. And Warsaw is now working on new urban planning policy. We need to redefine our planning policy. We are working on new development strategy and new general plan. So we will see how it will goes. I think this spring we will see the first public consultations of those documents. And another document which gives us a very strict frameworks for environmental protection activities is Environmental Protection Program. And it also gives us frames in which we only can, design and make our projects.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I would say standardization is good from my point of view, because it's like a good tool for everyone to work with, to use like good examples. And I would say in the area of smart city, we should, so in many cases, we should think rather on something like good practices and examples
for
to
example,
promote.
the open framework, I don't know how it's Vienna, but for example, in Warsaw, there is an open framework for bus schedules and train schedules, so developers can tap into them. And for example, external privately developed apps like Jak dojadę, how do I get there, can just download schedules or information about when the next bus is going to be to optimally plan a route. This is a good example of standardization, like good practice.
But this is also a problem. This is because the scheduling is not standardized or is standardized, but
we should move
different standards are not used by everyone.
We should move to, like, even if the standard is not as directly defined, but its broader application is the benefit that we get from it. Yeah, thank you very much.
So standardization I think in many areas, and I'm definitely not an expert on that, but can of course create more efficient processes. One example in Vienna is that we have a climate analysis map of the whole city where we look at the mesoclimate, and based on that we take the decision to conduct microclimate studies for specific kind of development areas. And I think in these areas, standardization would speed up the process a little bit, because there's so many different factors and modeling and questions that, of course, need to take into account local situation. But I think the data set could be more standardized for a faster rollout. But also from the Superkreisel project that I mentioned before, an example where standardization can be problematic, because standardization in Austria is also often discussed in context of norms, technical norms. So when we talk about redesign of public space, we often try to use tactical urbanism methods. So to redesign something fast with very cheap, very quickly implementable measures. Just change something, put up some, I don't know, some kind of furniture, but often it doesn't meet certain technical standards, and then so we can't do it. So we actually need to realize something more expensive, and that really, of course, stands in the way of some projects that could easily create a change that you can see and feel. So I guess there's limitations to standardization, but yeah, I definitely see that in terms of data-driven things, especially data that is also really supposedly public good. I think there's a lot of benefit there, and Vienna also, of course, provides different kinds of public data sets. I'm not sure if we have some kind of publicly available data on public transportation. That's interesting. I need to look into that.
There is even one example coming from the United States, apparently. One city in Colorado has publicized the data about the public paid parking, where it is empty and where is it full. And Google Maps navigates drivers to the streets that have empty parking spaces, so it minimizes people circling endlessly and looking for parking spaces. Like, hey, there is nothing here, go there.
Interesting. I only know that in Vienna we had the discussion with several owners of private parking garages that are often in Vienna. They're often not full, so there would be a lot of potential underground where people park in public space. To convince some of them to share their data, so that we could credibly communicate to people living in certain areas that there's different kinds of options where they could park their car instead of in public space. But it wasn't very successful.
Well, I wish you good luck on this. And the next question is, how do we promote positive behaviors, and what is the extent of, where is the barrier between good practice and the actual necessity, like Mr. Nicau said about the family with disabled children? I think it's a very viable necessity for a car use in city. So the question is, how do we promote positive behaviors, and how do we do it in a way that does not exclude certain people, actively does not harm their existence in the city?
Again, not easy to answer the question. Well, actually, people are mostly make decision taking simple consideration of benefit. So they simply, why they do get rid of the car? Because the car can be a problem, because you spend so much time in traffic. So finally, if you just calculate that you waste your time, that you waste your costs for petrol, for car repairs, etc., then the next step is that you need to move to tram, to a public transportation. How can we promote? Actually, we can show the people, yes, that it makes sense and it's actually cost effective. I have some experiences just in the precast concrete, and simply the main factor, I was amazed, but the main factor for many people is the cost and time. So just we need to show that it's good for them, and it's also cost effective for them.
There is no alternative to driving other than viable solutions. I agree. Thank you very much.
Okay, so now I'll make a small self-promotion from Zarząd Zieleni.
Go on.
Yeah, we have a lot of experience in this field. We have our Kamień Pavilion. I hope you guys know it. And in this pavilion, we conduct environmental education, meeting, debates, concerts, workshops, nature walks, exhibitions. In this pavilion, we support green initiatives of residents. We cooperate with non-governmental organizations, and all events are free of charge. Everyone are welcome. So, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so here I would add maybe an example of parking fees and the increase of parking fees. Maybe very controversial, but if we do it very slowly in small steps, we could change the people's behavior and make people move in another way.
Yeah, the approach that we have a capitalist society, but there is a flat fee for parking in regardless of demand, in regardless of how much people use it or don't use it. So, like, kind of counterproductive. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like the idea of polluters.
Charge people
for
wasteful
polluting.
behaviors more, and if you do less, you pay less in the case of pollution. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
But Piotr, I agree that that is a very good example of like we need pull factors, we need incentives, and we need a great public transportation and infrastructure for active mobility, and create really good offers. But the push factors are often overlooked a little bit on purpose, and we have a similar issue in Vienna because it's really embarrassing to talk about it. While a lot of things in urban planning go really well in Vienna, we have very cheap parking in public space for people that live in Vienna. So per month, I think it's 12 euros within your own district. That is ridiculously cheap, and it's very, very hot topic politically in the sense of you dare not talk about it. But
is it a flat fee per car, or does it rise like if it is a second or third car in your family?
No, it doesn't. No, that's true. You can per household you can only register 2 cars.
Because in Warsaw it's like very cheap to register the first one, but then it becomes expensive.
We don't even have that. It does not get more expensive. I think. I'm actually not sure about this, but I think there's only been an increase with the inflation, but not even that, I think. So you pay a ridiculously low amount of money for parking in public space. And we have also proposed, what you just proposed, to raise the tariffs over the course of a couple of years, communicate it very transparently, so that it's not a shock to everyone. Also maybe introduce a scheme for, the larger cars that we see in Vienna as well. But it is a very, very difficult issue. But I will say that car ownership in Vienna is decreasing per capita, but because population growth is so strong, in absolute numbers, we're not seeing that decrease as well. So it's going to be really interesting because we have been reducing quite a lot of parking spots in recent years, and so far it's not been an issue. But of course we need to speed up the process dramatically because we're only talking about single streets now, and we need to. If we want to reach our goals, then we need to really speed up the process, and that is only going to work if we have a bit more of a cost reality of what it actually means to own a car and what the cost is also for the public sector. And I think in Vienna, unfortunately I can't really say that we're moving in that direction and that there's a political will for that at the moment.
Thank you. Sure.
Are there any limits, time limits? In the cities or different areas?
So there's different areas where you're allowed to park for a very short amount of time, like 10 minutes. But the whole city area, meanwhile, ever since I think in 2020, they expanded it to the whole city, is only parking allowed for inhabitants. So you can park within your own district, but you can stay there for as long as you like. So you can. There's been some art projects, people just planting trees in their cars because they can also leave it in public space because they pay their parking ticket. So there's no limitations.
One interesting idea that's like very well implemented, I think, in the Netherlands is that you take like the area of the car multiplied by its weight. So the smaller the car you own, the cheaper it is for you to get. Like the smallest cars pay basically nothing. But if you own a Rolls Royce, it's like 60,000 euro a year. If you can pay that, But yeah. My next question would be actually about housing. Is like a city's responsibility to make sure that everyone has an ability to have an affordable place to stay in a city? Like, are homeless people something that exists and we kind of turn a blind eye to this? Or is it in the city's responsibility, like, as a long-term goal to get rid of it? Mr. Alexander.
Once it's a big issue because to build a settlement is extremely expensive, and the city has also limitations in terms of budget, and it costs a lot. So as I mentioned in the first question, there must be a cooperation with the private sector because simply somebody must pay for that. And I mean, in terms of regulation, once I was involved in the project, private partnership project, and there were some good case studies showing that there must be a good cooperation between public and private sector. Because I just assume if we just agree that the city will be responsible for those issues, as you mentioned, the city by its own probably will not afford to do it. So there must be some cooperation with private, or at least with a state. So with some a bigger community or a stakeholder with larger amount of money.
Because the existence of homeless people in the city generates costs and also drives away people from either visiting or living in some place. So it's actually a cost, also it adds to the cost. Thank you very much for your insight.
Okay, thank you. So, affordable housing policy, of course, is very important, and Warsaw is building municipal apartments. I know it's not enough, still not. We are supported with the government, but because we don't have anyone from the Biuro Architektury now, so I can say how Zarząd Zieleni is supporting this housing policy, because it's the quality of living. It's not only about the flats, but it's also about the territory surrounding, the area surrounding those flats. And we are trying to rearrange these areas and put the green infrastructure close to home. I mean, the squares, parks, even to rebuild the greenery in the streets.
So you don't get the sense of living in a concrete jungle, but in actually a place you want to stay in.
Yes, and it's very important for the microclimate and the whole quality of living, have the nature close to home, the places for recreation, to contact with the nature. So by the projects we can do and we are doing, I'm trying to support this quality of living in Warsaw.
Thank you very much.
So on this subject, I would add maybe vacant buildings that are empty, and they are empty in the city center. Like, as you mentioned, using existing infrastructure, existing buildings that we already have. Maybe that we should
make it
modernize,
make it
more
prohibitively expensive to own something empty.
Yeah, maybe that it's not profitable
it's,
to keep empty building, but it's still problem, or it's still connected with problems with ownership.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So, from a Viennese perspective, I will say that I definitely think that the local government, or in general the public sector, has to lead in the housing policy. That doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be provided by the public sector, by a city, by local government, by local authority itself, but it has to set the guidelines so that to steer private development in the right direction. Bartek sent me some information beforehand on this Lex developer that you have in
Yes, because
in
to quickly explain, Lex developer is a situation where basically developers in Poland can get a special permission to ignore zoning laws if they get into a deal with the municipality, which often leads to corruption schemes, let's be honest.
If I can add something.
Of course.
So, I'm sorry, well, I have to say something. But that's all true, but the local authorities still have to agree on this whole project. And so far, only few projects buildings were built.
Agreed to this law.
Yes, agreed to this law, less than 20. So no, it's not this big amount like it can be. And
yeah, thank you for your insight. And my last question for today, unless Lena, you want to add something more to the topic? Okay, thank you. My last question for today is what long-term city development solution like should we aim to? Like you mentioned that Vienna is now in a period of intensive growth. Smaller cities have a period of decline. What is like the ultimate goal? Do we endlessly expand the big cities, like a sponge absorbing new citizens, especially in an aging society, or do we like set ourselves limits or kind of promote to people and push to people like, okay, maybe spread out a bit, not concentrate in like gigantic agglomerations, 10, 12, 15, however many in the country, and just have empty plots of land around it and dying small cities, basically. So what is the long-term goal in every one of your opinions, and also any closing statements you might have on our debate? What is the desired outcome of the cities in the long term? Mr. Alexander.
Well, there are lots of small questions or semi-questions that are actually in this question involved, because it depends. Why we have faced in Poland this internal migration, because lots of people moved to Warsaw from in 1990s or at the beginning of the 21st century. Because we have changed our economy. There are lots of services starting from the 21st century, and after communism collapse, we have lots of services developed, and the services needed people. And mostly the companies that were specialized in services, they planned the location of the companies in the big cities, because there's ease to find it, employees, students, or other, let's say, to cooperate, because people are easy available in the big cities. So in the long term of the city, I think it depends how the whole economy in the country or in the Europe will behave. If we will be still, let's say, developing services, there's going to be probably more people coming into cities, and we will face the problem of traffic and those problems actually that were discussed today. On the other side, I was really there was a time during the COVID pandemic situation that there was a tendency that people
remote work,
they started to work remotely. And actually, I noticed that still it is this mode of working is available. Lots of my colleagues, they work like 3 days in the office and 2 days off, so they stay at home. And I have a colleague that he lives like 200 kilometers from Warsaw, and he got the agreement with the company that he works only for 2 days in Warsaw. So normally he lives outside Warsaw, so 200 kilometers from Warsaw, and only comes for Tuesday and Wednesday.
Yeah, because every passing year, more and more jobs are available to being remotized, if it's even a noun.
Yeah, that is 100% truth, and I think that there's one option that we can maybe solve a bit the problem of highly populated cities.
Promote remote work whenever it's possible through either tax subsidies or like, hey, the problem of traffic and congestion here might not exist, and also we can solve the problem of smaller cities dying out.
Yeah, that's true, and of course we face a big problem here in Warsaw of housing prices. They're extremely high. So normally the young family, they cannot afford to buy a flat. Yes.
Or even to rent sometimes.
Yeah, that is impossible. And on the other side, we have small cities in the eastern Poland or in the north part of Poland that actually they are depopulated.
Yeah, the difference is kind of shocking, because I was actually, before the debate, I was looking for the price of like the smallest 20-something square meters one-person apartment in Poland. If you look to smaller cities in like Podlasie region, which is the depopulating region that Mr. Nisau mentioned, for the same price you can get 80 meters, brand new flat, or a home and a garden. And it's the same price. And even near the train station, so it's not like completely remote.
Yeah, that's true. So it's going to be a big problem. But on the other side, we will not solve the problem only at the level of the cities, because there must be a, I would say, the
Push
good
from the city,
push
from the
from
center, top down.
Yeah, the central government in Poland or whatever in the Europe, they need to invest into public transportation, so the railway, highways, etc., because simply people cannot move freely.
It's not the distance that's limiting, it's time. Like
Yeah,
you can live an hour from the city and it can be 10 kilometers or 100 kilometers, but it's an hour for you still.
Yeah, certainly, it's true. I mean, I have a colleague in China, and the train speeds up to 320 kilometers per hour, so it's an extremely fast train, and it's not a problem, the distance. But here in Poland, we don't have those.
Like the famous first advertisement for TGV, family in Paris, work in Lyon.
Yeah, that's true. But on the other side, what option do we have right now? We can simply go on with this type of development, and in the next 20 years in Warsaw, there's going to be maybe 3-4 million people living, and we will not manage to contain yes, and to build up the infrastructure so fast, because there's going to be another problems. I was cooperating for many years with German universities, and in Germany they have a problem because it is also extremely expensive to maintain the highways, the railway system that was actually built up in 1960s, 1970s.
And the costs are catching up now.
Yes, yes, that is true. So also we need to pay attention what we are building, where we are building, and how much does it cost.
And do we have the funding secured? And this is, I think, a great question for Ms. Alicia. Do we have the funding? Do we have the... Is it viable even?
Difficult question, because I wanted to say about the quality of living.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah. But if it comes to demographic questions, I wouldn't afraid that we will have 3 or 4 million people in Warsaw, because the last demographic prognosis made for the general plan and development strategy I mentioned before says about maybe 2.5 millions in next 20 years, 25 years. So it's not that big change. Of course, it's
so but it's like predictable enough so we can build up to that.
Yes,
change.
yes, I think so. And as I said, we're designing our urban policy so it will fit this amount of new citizens. And Warsaw is also working on implementation, the idea of 15-minute city. Also, you mentioned you're working on this in Vienna. And step by step, I know it's small steps, but we are closer in some parts of the city. And of course, it requires coordination of transport policy and mixed-use development, well-developed public spaces and green areas, but all those issues will be included in those new
guidelines,
urban documents.
Thank you very much. To those who don't know, 15-minute city is basically an idea that you should...
I don't know. I have no idea, because it's maybe maybe we should open other discussion about migration.
Okay.
Then the migration, it's
great.
What will happen?
Great concept for a future debate. Then is the kind of concept of like some towns becoming ghost towns just a natural, inevitable thing, or is it something that we should fight against? Great concept for a future debate. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
So maybe first to address some small rural, in Austria it's more villages that also face population decline, have been facing it for many decades, often, villages or areas where there was one specific area of industry that just isn't coming back in the future, and that's probably for good in many cases. We also have that issue that we need to address the question, is it in any case economically viable to keep up any kind of public infrastructure in those areas? And in some areas in Austria, and also in the county where I'm from, in Styria, there are some areas where the local governments have made the decision to close down certain, it started with post offices, but in some cases it's also schools, and to maybe move them together with the school from another district. And that is a process that is going on in many areas of Austria. I think that the future perspective is one that Vienna and also some other agglomerations, for example, also the agglomeration around Linz, it's the third largest town in Austria, they already go towards that direction. I think the future is a city-regional one, so it is an agglomeration, but polycentric agglomeration, not single-centric agglomeration, that is connected within the city region, but also to other city regions with high quality public transportation. And in Austria, due to, of course, also the size of the country, we are already quite close. What I think is a big challenge for city regional development, that